Hello everyone. My name is Carolyn Harley. I'm a singer-songwriter, storyteller, and late bloomer. And I fell in love with the story of the Famous Five when I first moved to Calgary back in 1986. And I started teaching preschool at Nellie McClung Elementary School. A few years later, I was part of a project to celebrate Calgary's 100th anniversary. And so I researched Nellie McClung and the Famous Five to write a song for that project. And that's when I became a great fan of these five amazing Alberta women. I was impressed by their determination in the face of adversity and disappointment. And I loved how they worked together in spite of the fact that they didn't agree with each other on all the issues of the day. And lastly, I was very impressed with the fact that they were late bloomers. These were not young women when they set out on this journey to personhood, but they persevered, they worked together, and they finally won the person's case. And this decision changed the definition of the word person in the BNA Act to include women. And what an amazing accomplishment. And so in honor of the Famous Five, this is my song, The Ballad of the Famous Five. Emily Murphy, Henrietta Muir Edwards, Louise McKinney, Irene Harleby, and Nellie McClung carved a place in the history of Canada's nation. The Famous Five changed the face of our land. They were born in a time that seemed so benign, when ladies were seen but not heard, fair of face and in their place, when meekness was mostly preferred. The five looked around, and everywhere they found the world revolved around men. They said we must fight what is not right, no matter who we may offend. Five women united, and united we're strong. Five women said, now we've begun. They rallied the nation for all generations and fought till the battle was won. Women wanted a voice and a say in the choice of the matters affecting our land. They didn't believe they shouldn't achieve every right freely given to men. So arm in arm from the cities and farms, their voices joined and were heard. Hand in hand, the women of this land fought the fights, won the rights they deserved. Five women united, and united we're strong. Five women said, now we've begun. They rallied the nation for all generations and fought till the battle was won. And fought till the battle was won. Emily Murphy, Henrietta Muir Edwards, Louise McKinney, Irene Harleby, and Nellie McClung. Heroes of mine, the Famous Five.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. And our first thanks goes out to Carolyn Harley for her Ballad of the Famous Five. Such a moving, inspiring, beautiful, beautiful song, which hopefully all of us will learn and sing along by the time we reach the 95th anniversary of the person's case on October 18th in 2024. So on behalf of the Famous Five Foundation, it's wonderful to greet all of you from across Canada. Please keep connecting in the chat room. We read everything and we appreciate your comments and your remarks. As you probably know, June internationally is Pride Month, and we're happy to be supporters of the International Month of Pride and for the other 11 months of the year as well. So all of us can be who we are meant to be, who we want to be. Congratulations, International Pride. In Canada, June is also National Indigenous History Month. And on June the 21st, it's National Indigenous Peoples Day. And that brings us to this week. What we've decided to do instead of our land acknowledgement is to ask everyone now just to bow their heads and take a moment to remember that we are all treaty people. Please send blessings of healing and support to our Indigenous brothers and sisters, because we are all treaty people. Like Rich. It's hard to switch gears, but we need to switch gears. And as you know, these virtual pink tea conversations are brought to you by Enbridge. Our wonderful partner for 20 years, Enbridge has introduced us to many of their extraordinary female leaders. And today we're going to meet Amanda Afonso. Amanda has been at the front of leading teams in communications, in governance, in sustainability, corporate social responsibility, and now is a key strategist with Enbridge. And when she's not there, Amanda is leading as president of the Parkdale Community Association here in Calgary. And just recently, I think 3 months ago, Amanda and her buddies opened the very first, the only one and only the second totally accessible ice rink in Canada. The first in Alberta and the second in Canada. What an achievement. And Amanda has more plans to make accessibility more available in Parkdale, but also throughout Calgary as a way of showing we need everybody to participate in the building of Canada. But now Amanda's responsibility is to give us access to our two outstanding Canadians who are joining us today. So Amanda, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Frances. It's an honor to be here today on behalf of Enbridge. Enbridge has been a proud supporter of the Famous Five Foundation for nearly 20 years, and we wholeheartedly support the Foundation's vision to champion the development and recognition of Canada's female leaders. We share this goal within Enbridge and continue to work on our commitment to diversity and inclusion. In late 2020, Enbridge added inclusion as one of our core values, complementing our existing values of safety, integrity, and respect. We continue to increase female representation at Enbridge at senior levels. And today, 36% of our board of directors are women, and 31% of all leadership roles are held by women. We're proud of this, but we also know we have further to go, which is why we're working to increase representation of women, underrepresented racial and ethnic groups, Indigenous people, veterans, and people with disabilities. It is now my pleasure to briefly introduce two outstanding female leaders. The Honorable Nancy Ruth has co-founded a number of major organizations, which without a doubt have improved the lives of tens of thousands of girls and women. Her Canadian Women's Foundation has raised more than $80 million and funded more than 15,000 community projects. Her Legal Education and Action Fund ensures all legislation is now gender neutral. And the Linden School for Girls, which educates and mentors girls from kindergarten to grade 12, are two primary achievements. Nancy's courage has enabled her to convince the federal government to adopt gender-based analysis for its programs. thereby improving the economic and social justice for all girls and women. As a senator, she successfully advocated for the addition of sex, age, and disability to Canada's criminal code provisions on hate propaganda, access to medically assisted dying, and the 2018 restoration of a gender-neutral English national anthem. Helping Nancy to tell her story today is our host, Dr. Ramona Lumpkin. Dr. Lumpkin is interim president and vice chancellor of Mount St. Vincent University and Nancy's biographer. Their book, The Unconventional Nancy Ruth, is another national success. Dr. Lumpkin has a distinguished history in academia and community service. And like Nancy, she has received many awards, including the Order of Canada. I'm looking forward to today's conversation. Dr. Lumpkin, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here. I'm delighted to have the chance to ask Nancy Ruth a few questions, and I have confidence, as always, she'll be able to give us some interesting answers. Nancy Ruth, you've led a complex life with many different jobs, projects, and engagements over the years. You worked at a church camp in Bali, building pig pens and a pond to breed giant frogs. You were a fundraiser for a church retreat center in Naramata, BC, an HR consultant for churches in Britain, a clown, a United Church minister, a candidate for provincial political office, a feminist philanthropist, a campaigner for the equality sections of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and a member of Canada's Senate. One strong thread running through many of these life occupations is your activism, and my questions today will follow that thread. You discovered feminism in Finland at the age of 26, and over a decade later, you finally found your people when you connected with the Toronto feminist community to work on the national campaign for Canada's equality rights in the Charter. So to start off, can you talk about your work with the Charter of Rights Coalition, or CORC, and the other major initiatives that showed the importance of Section 15 and Section 28 in the Charter?
I surely can. Some of you may remember in 1979 in the Victoria Conference, this is Pierre Elliott Trudeau's time. This is the time of René Lévesque. This is the time of Chrétien making his late kitchen night deals and the night of the long knives, said Quebec. Anyhow, this was Charter time. Trudeau wanted to repatriate the British North America Act and to include a third part of our Constitution, that is the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Now, women had known for decades that Diefenbaker's Bill of Rights only allowed what's called formal equality. Men should be treated the same as women and women the same as men. They didn't deal with differences, the fact that women got pregnant, that they were paid less, and in some instances they weren't allowed to work after they were married, and so on and so forth. So women knew there was a lot to be done, and if it wasn't in the Charter, we could all be in trouble. So the Canadian Advisory Council on the Status of Women organized to have some lawyers put on a national conference for women to educate women from across Canada on what the Charter could mean and how we wanted it to be. Well, lo and behold, guess what? The minister responsible for women canceled it, and that was Lloyd Axworthy. We never actually knew why, but don't shove us around that way, Minister. We don't like it. So a group of us met at the Cow Cafe in Toronto, and we decided in 3 weeks we were going to run our own conference, and that became the Ad Hoc Conference on the Constitution. 1,300 women came from across Canada by rail, by air. They were billeted here and there. Civil servants who were pretty angry at the government for what they'd done. The women were wonderful. They gave us the free code numbers from their MPs' offices. You couldn't do this stuff now, but then you could. And they used their Gestetner machines and fax machines to roll out the news that there was this big gathering coming. And the National Film Board sent a filmmaker to film the whole darn thing. So we have tapes of it actually happening. And in that conference, over 2 days, we banged out what the equality section, section 15 of the charter, could look like. The next day, after a wonderful reception at Joe Clark and Maureen, what's Maureen's last name? I've pulled a blank. Anyhow, you'll know. We went on to City Hall and started to talk, okay, if we get this thing, what will it mean? How do we control its interpretation? So we closed up that meeting. Those who were chose to lobby ministers, the lawyers, were sent off to do that and to make them, start to pull the line. And we started to organize women's groups because we had these women from all over Canada. And the Canadian Advisory Council on the Status of Women, some of you may remember that Doris Anderson, the president, resigned over this, that Lord Axworthy had canceled her conference. Well, Lucy Pepin came in as president, and she agreed to send 4 lawyers down to the United States to look at what legal defense funds were at that time. So they looked at Black legal defense funds, at the National Organization for Women, and other defense funds. And they came up with a recommendation of what would work in Canada. And while this was going on, because of course it had to be translated into French and English, there were others meeting in Toronto for a workshop to figure out, okay, what are all the steps that need to happen? Like, besides teaching women what this could mean for them, oh my gosh, we need to teach the judges. So when we go to court, they'll know how to interpret this section of the charter. So we had a lot of things to do after that City Hall meeting. One of them was to establish CORC, which is the one I was involved with. It comprised 17 national women's groups. And we got these groups together because the National Action Committee on the Status of Women, the old NAC, held a conference in Ottawa to bring women together. And these women's groups were there and they wanted to move on. They wanted to do 2 things. One was to educate their membership all across Canada. That was the advantage of national women's groups. They all had chapters everywhere. And the second thing was that they were willing to lobby their provincial attorney generals. Now, some of you may remember that great photograph of Trudeau flipping up his tails as the Queen is about to sign the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Well, the guys in that night of the long knives that Chrétien held in the kitchen, with I think Roy McMurtry too, there was a 3-year moratorium on the equality section, not on the other sections of the charter, just on the equality section. And in theory, they said, well, we need time to rectify the things that are wrong in our regulations and in our laws. The good thing about, we were angry at the time, but the good thing about it was that it gave us 3 years' time. So we figured out what we had to do. We sent folk down to the United States to figure out how we could best do it and adapt it to Canada. We created CORC, the National Women's Group Strategy. And we also did statute audits that were run by my friend Beth Atchison. The statute audits there was a person in every province whose job was to organize lawyers and law students throughout the province or territory to look at the laws and regulations and figure out which were discriminatory. And then that information was fed to the lobby groups of these women's organizations, and they went to the attorney generals and say, hey, minister, look what we got and look what you got to do. So that's what happened. And it happened all across the country. And then there also was a federal audit. And after that, LEAF was created. So in 1985, on April the 17th, the first day that the charter, the equality section of the charter came into effect, LEAF was ready to go. And you know what? The legal strategy was really simple. The deal was take an easy case that no one is going to object to. So Eloise Spitzer up in the Yukon found a French-Canadian teacher who had married an Anglophone and was not allowed to use her single name when she was teaching French in the schools. I mean, who was going to object to this? So this was the first charter challenge, and LEAF won it. And LEAF has gone on for 36 years, improving the rights of women and girls. And You know, we started off with Diefenbaker's formal equality. It was only in the Supreme Court Justice Rosie Abella's judgment a few weeks ago, last month, on it's the case with pensions for the RCMP and some of the police forces. It was considered discriminatory because women who took time out were not allowed the same pension benefits as men who took time out. And of course, more women took time out because they had childcare responsibilities. Anyhow, Abella said that there had to be substantive equality. And that's what Leaf started off to fight for, to have substance in what equality is, not just a formal equality. So Abella has now enshrined it in the Supreme Court of Canada, and on we go from there. But it took 36 years, friends, so don't give up. You got to keep working on it. So that's my story of Cork and the Charter.
Thank you so much, Nancy Ruth. And I think probably those with us today will understand how completely engrossing it was for me to immerse myself in your life, because that's just one small sample of the many projects that you've joined in and given leadership to. I can't help every time you talk about Leaf thinking about the description I ran across of you constantly putting on a tree costume and doing and going around with a bucket in your hand as a tree for Leaf and raising money to help Leaf keep that going. My next question was going to be, how important has Leaf been in keeping up the momentum for change after the equality section of the Charter came into effect? But you've certainly already made a compelling case for the importance of Leaf in that regard over the last 36 years. Is there anything you'd want to add, or shall I move on to my next question?
Well, you can go up on the leaf.ca website and see the cases and sign up for their newsletter. But they have lots of sexual harassment cases. The judge in Alberta who was taken down, Robin, can't remember his last name. That was really a result of Leaf pushing. This judge had said to an Aboriginal woman who'd been violated, why didn't you keep your legs together? And comments like that. So Leaf is always on the watch for this. And it does make a difference. If you've been raped, you no longer have the right to have your name published in the newspaper. It used to be the newspaper's right to publish whatever they wanted. It's against the law now. And it's against the law because Leaf was there.
Mm-hmm. Those are really great examples. Joe Clark's wife's name, by the way, is Maureen McTeer. Yeah, bingo, it came. So in many of your talks and speeches, and say that in writing about Nancy Ruth, I had such a wealth of material that I wanted to bring her voice into it as much as possible, almost as if it were part memoir. Lots of records of her speeches and talks and letters and public communications of various kinds. And in many of those talks and speeches, you say to your audience, don't do it alone. Find a group of like-minded people and work together with them on the change that's needed in our world. So can you tell us about how you followed that principle in your own work? What are some of the best times you've had with other women as you joined forces to make change happen?
Well, I had a great time every time I did it. Sure, all women's groups, little groups that get together, say, you get an idea and you figure out how you're going to make it happen. And there's always some troubles on the way, but that's part of the fun of it. And I would say that my greatest friends have come out of doing this work with other women. So you can't do it alone. I mean, the reason I told that story about formal equality to substantive equality, it took 36 years of Leaf and other lawyers battering away. And one of the good things that all those volunteer lawyers who worked for Leaf over all those decades, many of them have now become judges. So we can anticipate that the laws will change to benefit women because they understand fundamentally that equality has to have substance to it.
Well, that's a wonderful example of the power, not only the power of collectivity, but the power of change in one generation, then to lead on to change in future generations. That makes me hopeful. So sticking with LEAF for a moment, but actually making a shift, many of the women involved with LEAF were lawyers who used the legal system to work for change on behalf of women, as you've described. You yourself weren't a lawyer. So when you announced that you were planning to run for political office, you said, if I can't litigate, I'll legislate. And you then went on to run for political office twice, and you were defeated both times. Then at the age of 64, when you were nearing what we call normal retirement age, out of the blue, you learned that you were being appointed by Prime Minister Paul Martin to the Senate of Canada. At last, you had your chance to legislate. During your 12 years as a senator, you undertook many campaigns to make our legal system work better on behalf of women. And perhaps none was more important than your campaign to strengthen gender-based analysis of legislation and of budgets. Can you talk about gender-based analysis? How do you go about, how did you go about getting it on the agenda?
After Carolyn Bennett's presentation of her report yesterday on the missing and murdered and whatever, you know, the Parliament does a lot of talking. It's a little short on action. And I was determined we would see some evaluation of gender-based analysis. At that time, when I first was in the Senate, it hadn't become GBA plus. So at that time it was GBA. And I didn't know how to do it. No minister, you know, they'd all tick off their little boxes, that their proposals would go to Treasury Board and on up to the cabinet table, but you never knew what it said. And the civil servants wouldn't leak to you. And I didn't know how to get at this. So Sheila Fraser, who was then the Auditor General, was a bit of a pal of mine. And we were in the elevator together, nobody else there. And I said to her, Sheila, would the Auditor Generals ever do an audit of government departments on how they're doing with gender-based analysis? She has the most marvelous twinkle in her eye. She just smiled and laughed and said, sure. I don't think my staff are going to like this because we'll have to change plans, but yes, I will. And I said, okay, what do I have to do to make that possible for you? Because nothing works in Ottawa just out of the blue, eh? So she knew I was on the Finance Committee in the Senate and she was about to appear. So I got my friend, Alberta Senator Grant. Come on, Ramona, remember these names for me. Grant Mitchell. Grant
Mitchell, thank you. You got there first.
I got Grant to ask Sheila the questions because he was very keen to have this done too. And so she told us in that meeting the things that needed to happen before she could proceed as the Auditor General to do the audit. Well, we got them done, and it took over a year to go through those processes because I had to get to the House of Commons, get the Status of Women Committee there to agree to it. I used the NDP where I had closer links than I did in my own Conservative Party. And they were about to move a motion, and I knew if I didn't give the Conservatives something, they would vote against it, and then I wouldn't get what I wanted. So I divvied it up into various things, and the Conservatives got a very good looking piece of it, and the NDP got what they wanted. Everybody was happy. The motion passed and it went to the floor, and from the floor it went to the Auditor General's office. So she did her evaluation of 5 departments, most of which came up short, particularly the Transport Department. Actually, Indian Affairs came up fairly well. It was the best of the departments she did. That may surprise many people. But Transport was a mess, and John Baird was the minister, and he came up to me and he said, what is this, Senator? And I says, look, John, this is 2008. We're in bad economic times. You're building bridges, highways, roads, railways. Women are poor. They need subways, buses, you know, wide enough sidewalks they can wheel their prams and grocery carts down. That's what it's about. And he said, oh, so anyhow, the deal was that 5 years later, there would be another audit. So when 5 years was about to pass by, I phoned Sheila up and I said, can you phone your staff? You're old, she'd retired by that time. phone them up and see what's going on over there and how much fuss do I need to make before it can happen. And she phoned me back and said, no, they're going to do it anyhow. But it is now 5 years again. And I am actually appearing before the Women's Caucus of the Independent Senators Group next week, I think, or the week after, to talk about getting the Auditor General to do a GBA. When Ferguson was still the Auditor General, he did not commit to doing it again, partly because Trudeau said he would do it. And you remember the 2015 election, and in 2016, the Privy Council office put in a document requiring all departments, the whole of government, to refrain from using the word sex and to start using the word gender. Now, the implication was they should have some analysis with this. But every time I get MPs or senators to ask the question to ministers, hey, why haven't you tabled the GBA plus with the bill when it's tabled? You just get bullshit. So there's a long way to go.
So the fight isn't over, but it's
never over.
It's great.
It's never over. And the other thing is that the plus is now more important than I think women and girls.
We'll come
I
back
suspect
to that.
this to be true.
We'll come back to that. It's time now to move over and to hear from our youth panelists who have each have a question. We have two. And the first one, Jazz, both from the Linden School for Girls in Toronto. It's been mentioned that Nancy Ruth helped to found many years ago. So Jazz, over to you.
Hi, Nancy. I'm Jazz, and I'm 15 years old. I have the privilege of attending the Linden School, which you helped establish. Thank you for surrounding me with people who encourage and support me. When you were 15, what was life like for you? Thank you.
Okay, well, when I was do I hear the second student now, or shall I respond?
Answer this one first.
Okay. Well, when I was 15, we had Sputnik just going up in the air. We had Eisenhower interfering in the Middle East in the Suez crisis. We had Lester Pearson winning the Nobel Prize. Those were the kind of things I lived with, and my family had always been politically involved, so they were talked about at the dining room table. But really, I didn't pay any attention to them at all. I was more sort of into the flying purple people eater and the teeny weeny itsy bitsy yellow polka dot bikini. We even went to see Elvis Presley once in Maple Leaf Gardens. So I guess that's what my life was like, and I didn't have much more purpose than just enjoying it.
And I think that's why I think your life is an inspiration to girls and young women, because you can become something even if you're a pretty clueless teenager, as you described yourself as being, Nancy Ruth. And our next youth questioner is Samantha, also from the Linden School. Over to you, Sam.
Hi, Nancy. I'm Sam, and I'm in grade 11. Thank you for supporting the Linden School. When you were my age, you were already looking for a purpose for your life. Why were you concerned about your purpose in life? And what did you decide your purpose was? Thank you for answering my question and for providing me with such an uplifting community like Linden.
Sam, I'm not sure I know the answer to your question. And it's interesting that you say that I was already looking for a purpose in life. It took me years. I think there are two comments I want to make. One is one can have more than one purpose in life, and that purposes in life can change as you go through life. The second comment was, I suspect it wasn't until I had a religious conversion experience in Bali, Indonesia, that I had a sense of purpose. I knew I was supposed to have a sense of purpose. My family had always taught us that we were to do something good for the public, so on and so forth. But, I was just doing a whole variety of things that young people do, touring Europe, hitchhiking, going to work camps, attending the London School of Economics on certain economic deals. I even went to secretarial school once, but it wasn't until I had that religious experience and found God that I decided that I wanted to work for the United Church of Canada. And then purposes change. You know, in the end, the church threw me out, and I didn't like that. So I took them to the Judicial Committee of the United Church and won. And then the charter happened. And so my whole life changed. So don't worry about finding a purpose. It'll come, go where your heart and your passion are. That's what I'd say, Sam.
Thank you, Nancy Ruth. I have another question. As Frances mentioned, this is National Pride Month, and you chose to out yourself as a lesbian during your second run for provincial office. An opponent threatened to out you himself, and you wanted to control the message. One of your slogans, one of your campaign slogans then became, "Put in a tough dike for tough times." But you also said at the same time that you believed many in the media and in the community around you already knew you were a lesbian and just didn't choose to make an issue of it. You've also said that for you, your identity as a woman is far more important than your sexual identity. Can you talk further about that?
Yeah, you know, I was a girl growing up. I wasn't a lesbian growing up. So, you know, I don't think I fell in love with a woman until sometime in my 20s. And it was a shock to me because it never occurred to me that's what my inclination was. And it was also a political statement as well as a preference. I mean, I think people can be lesbians or anywhere down that sexual long continuum for any number of reasons. What was your question?
It was just you said that your identity as a woman is more important and you're answering it.
Yeah, I think, you know, we all have various levels of discrimination. For instance, an easy one for me to talk about is I'm now blind. I can't tell you how many websites I look at by charities I support that don't give a flying fig to have colors that the blind can see. So that's one level of discrimination. If I go to Asia or Africa or Latin America as a Caucasian, I would be discriminated against. There are many levels of discrimination that people experience. And so for me, my primary one was as a woman, and secondarily then as a lesbian, and now as a disabled woman with blindness. You know, so it changes.
Right.
Discrimination changes, and it changes on the context. Like as a privileged white woman here, I'm privileged. I'm not just, I mean, if I go to a country that is outside my racial business, or even if I went to Europe where they have such contempt for North Americans, I would be discriminated against. And that's a cultural discrimination.
Right.
So, and Canada has done that too, to Italians, to Poles, to Ukrainians, you know.
Are you
the Anglos have done it.
Are you still, no, I know you are. You're still advocating very strongly on behalf of ending discrimination against women. That still seems to be one of your strong passions for which you're working. That, would you say that continues to compel you most in terms of your identity? Or you've said there are many things that you face right now in terms of different types of challenges or barriers, but it's your identity as a woman, I think, that you still feel strongly needs to be, or our identities as women that we have to fight for in terms of achieving justice.
Sure, just remember, substantive equality took 36 years to get into the Supreme Court judgment.
Right, right.
That's a shocker. Takes decades.
So we've talked some about passing things along, handing along generation to generation. Can you talk about the importance of women mentoring women? Who were your mentors?
Well, I remember a history teacher in grade school who was tolerant of me and excited my imagination, and that was good because I did well in that subject. I was not very good at school. And when I studied theology, I definitely had a mentor, the Reverend Gwyneth Hubble, she understood me. She just understood me. and I trusted her, and she was my mentor until she died. So I still keep a picture of her by me. She was a great woman, and I knew she loved me.
Mm.
And she believed in me. She believed I was more capable than my past had indicated. That is, a number of failures in scholastic matters.
Right.
Then I found theology, which I was interested in and was top in my class. So there you go.
That's you've spoken worlds to the whole importance of mentorship. One of the readers of our book, I should say, commented recently about how powerful she found the story of your relationship with your mother.
Mm-hmm.
Would you call your mother a mentor, or is that an entirely different relationship?
Well, I never have, but there's no reason I shouldn't. But I do that in retrospect. I think as I was living through my teenage rebellion years and everything else, she was just some old lady who got in my way. In fact, she didn't get in my way at all. She was behind me all the way. I mean, even when I did things like steal a car and drive to the bars in Buffalo at 3 o'clock in the morning and, all that teenage nutty stuff that you do. She was there for me, and I owe her a great debt. And she did support me, no question, all the way.
I have to say, I think that writing the chapter about your mother, about you and your mother, your relationship, was probably my favorite. The writing of it was the most pleasurable. Probably I learned the most from the chapter I wrote about you in the Senate, because I didn't grow up in Canada. So I had a crash course in how the parliamentary system works and what Canada's like, but what Canada's government, how it operates. But the chapter about you and your mother had so much learning for you as you, or I charted what would seem to be so much growth in your understanding and maturity as you learned to understand your mother, to forgive your mother. Both of you worked on understanding and forgiving each other. That's one of the big projects of adulthood, and it was really quite a joy to discover and to write about.
Thank you.
So what do you see? I'm just going to shift to the really big picture. What do you see in the future for girls and women in the global perspective? How will we come out of this current ungodly, unending pandemic that we're living through right now? What will it be like for women and girls specifically, or what do you hope it will be like?
In this country?
I'd say, focus on Canada or globally, whichever. But
well, the promises made in the budget with early childhood learning and daycare are absolutely critical for women being employed.
Yeah.
I think employers are now more aware and sensitive to the fact that women need to work and they need to be paid properly, and that they are in sectors that are low paid, and they perhaps could do a whole lot more. And employers need to take some responsibility for that. I don't do the social media. I don't know anything about it. But if I was Jazz or Sam, oh Lord, I wish them all the best in the world, but just don't do it alone. Get your friends around you and create the change you want to make. And some of that change, it doesn't have to be a big thing like the Constitution or the national anthem. It can be small things like being kind to somebody on the subway or on the bus, or helping someone carry their groceries when they're trying to push a pram at the same time. Just do something for others.
Or how about dressing up as a clown and trying to cheer people up on the subway?
Yeah, well, I also did that when I got depressed.
Exactly.
Because it cheered me up. Because I could see myself giving joy to others. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. One way of getting out of sadness is to forget yourself a bit and help someone else who's looking like they're sad. So what would you say I know this is a hard question, but I'm going to ask it. What would you say your legacy is? What do you want to be remembered for?
Well, I don't much care. what people remember me for. I mean, I know some of the phrases I've come out with in my career will be what I am remembered for by the press. But I suppose, I mean, my contributions are, in some hard times, I sustained women's groups across Canada financially that would have otherwise gone under. That's an achievement. That we have built the Canadian Women's Foundation, which Ramona, of course, you're bigwig now on the board. But, you know, that didn't exist. I think it's the 10th largest in the world now or something like that. And it was nothing. And this all came because, you know, we had a downstairs maid who left $40,000 to men. And I thought, this is crazy. She's a domestic worker from Ireland. How can this be? And that was the motivation for creating it. But I don't know. I don't much care whether they remember me or not. We got the work done. So I'd say that. And the Linden School is important because it trains girls' leadership from a feminist pedagogical, whatever, perspective. And all those things. LEAF goes on. But they don't have to remember me. The institutions are much more important than the individuals in it.
That's an interesting point for a biographer to think about, that we, I guess, in an ideal world, we remember what you created, maybe then the personality necessarily, but the creation that endures. That's good to think about. Are you happy that you had your biography written, or do you have any qualms about having so much of yourself out there for the world to read?
I'll separate the questions.
Okay.
When I was saying all that stuff about, you know, I care that the organizations continue and it doesn't matter whether they remember me or not. On the other hand, it is very nice that you have written this book so that if anybody wants to look it up, it'll be there. And the second half of the question was, how does it feel to have laid out in the pages and for anyone to read, as it were? Well, most of it, you know, I really don't know. I mean, it's a bit strange having your sex life put out there, and it's a bit strange having some of the family fights put out there. But the comments I get always are, the pictures are wonderful and how well written it is. And nobody says anything else. Those are the two consistent comments I have in the almost 1,000 copies we've already sold in 3 weeks.
Well, you know, the friends who write to me, and I haven't had any letters from anonymous fans yet, just friends, but thank you, friends. The ones who've written to me to say that they've read the book, what they focus on is what an extraordinary person you are. How glad they are to have had the chance to learn something more about you. Most of them knew you as a name, as Broken Crackers and Cold Camembert, or some of your more outrageous pieces of action, some of your outrageous acts, but they really, I think, have felt so strongly the poignancy of your struggles as an early, in your childhood and young womanhood. And then the sense of rooting for you when you finally got it together. And even one of them said to me, I think all young girls should read this because they'll know there's still hope. You can actually. My
eldest brother said to me, it should be used as an example in social work classes in university as kids who, you know, muck up, turn out good in the end.
Turn out okay. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Well,
I'm very pleased to be joining this conversation, although I'm sorry to interrupt it, but it's my responsibility to bring some questions for actually the both of you from our audience. And the first question that I have synthesized from a number of people, from Yvette, from Simon, and from Tara, was in terms of the negative impact disproportionately on women from COVID. And Ramona, you did ask Nancy that question, but I'm just wondering, other than childcare, Nancy and Ramona, what is it briefly that levels of government can do to help mitigate the disproportional impact of COVID.
Yeah, well, I will say it was so exciting to see early childhood education and childcare in the federal budget big time, because it's been 25 years since the Royal Commission on Women recommended that.
50.
30.
50.
50. Wow, where was I? I was in the United States then, but yes, 50 years. So obviously we waited a long time for that, but other things have to do with things that will accelerate the return of women who want to work to the workforce. Childcare is one, and once that happens, to get them back into the workforce, to provide, to deal substantively for an equitable outcome for women who have had to step out, so that they don't lose on their pension, so that they do get made whole again because of the pandemic impact on their employment and the need to rectify that. We're going to have, we know the numbers of women who have not returned as employment has picked back up again far outnumber the numbers of men. And one of the things that we're missing is female role models at senior levels for younger women as they come in, because the ranks of women in many industries have been decimated. So I think the government, and this is both a private and a public responsibility, I think businesses themselves need to look at how they can make sure that that women who return to work are made whole and have the right kind of restitution for the time that they've had to take away because of the pandemic.
Very good points, Ramona.
Yeah.
Marie and Katie are wondering about the impact of the Me Too movement on feminism in general. Nancy, what do you think about that? What's been the impact of Me Too?
I think it's great. Women have been given voice by the Me Too movement. They're allowed to talk out and to say it's not going. What never gets talked about, though, is the violence men perpetuate. I mean, I was interested, the lady from Enbridge was quite proud in stating the percentage of women on the board, 36% or whatever in the workforce. But if we ever asked the government to put quotas in, there would be an uproar. And I don't see why. If we really want to change those numbers after COVID, if we really want women to have the opportunities they are entitled to, I don't know how we're going to do it without putting in quotas. And that is just fine with me. It's not good enough for corporations to say, look at us. We've got 36% now on our board. Well, why is there not a federal law that says all corporate boards must have at minimum 40% of both sexes?
Good point. And in the province of Quebec, they have that, Nancy.
Yes, and there have been senators who have proposed such a law, but it has never passed, and the government has never made it part of government. There are things governments can do, and municipalities can do the same kind of thing. So can the provinces.
So I'm so glad to see your passion is still there, Nancy. And clearly you're going to continue to work in that regard. The last question from our guests comes from Taz, who says, what do you say to a woman who wants to be a leader? Others are encouraging her, but she just doesn't think she's a leader. What should she do, or how should she approach this, Nancy?
She should say, maybe I'm not a leader. I need to get together with a couple of friends who can also be leaders with me. Don't do it alone. Work together. And you know what? Leadership grows. It's like people grow into jobs and you grow into leadership too. I mean, leadership isn't just something you get. It's something for most people you develop.
Right. The opportunity to come along and you see.
Yeah, don't worry about it. Just do it. And you know what? You know the Swiss cheese formula? You know, you have a hunk of Swiss cheese and it's got holes in it. And the problem looks so enormous, this piece of cheese. Just start nibbling near the easiest hole and you slowly get it done. And that's how leadership happens too.
Excellent images. So now it's time for the Famous Five lightning round, where I'm just going to give you a statement and ask you to complete it in just 2, maybe 3 words. So no long sentences or paragraphs. So the first question is, and I'll start with you, Nancy. When I'm confused, I
Breathe.
Ramona, when I'm confused, I
talk with a trusted advisor.
Oh, nice. When I'm scared, Nancy, when you're scared,
I guess I
Nancy,
breathe too.
but then don't you commit to taking the next step?
I have to get myself centered and then I'm not so scared.
Interesting. Okay, Ramona, what do you do?
I phone my sister Linda
Why her?
because she's wise and has known me all my life and has a perspective that always helps to give me courage. And she's listening from Nashville, Tennessee right now.
Oh, hello, Ramona.
Hi, Linda.
So the third question is, when I am sad, I ... What do you do, Nancy, when you're sad?
I may put on music or I may put on clown face and go out and make somebody else happy.
Wonderful. Ramona?
I go for a walk, ideally in a garden.
So sort of harkening back to what Nancy says in terms of centering yourself.
Yes.
So the last question is, if the famous five were alive today, so they got your message, Nancy, about getting friends together. If they were alive today, they would ... Nancy?
They would spend most of their time reevaluating their mission given the attacks, the racism on the famous five. They would have to do some value re-education.
But Nancy, they didn't know then what we know now.
No, I know. But you said if they were alive today, that would be their first task.
Oh, I see. Having already.
Just like all us settlers have to open our ears and hear the indigenous people and their cries.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you. Ramona, if the famous five were alive today, they would
continue raising hell.
Yay! That's wonderful. That's really great. Well, now it's my pleasure on behalf of everybody from across Canada and from Nashville and elsewhere to say thank you to these two outstanding Canadians, these two trailblazers. So we're at a tea party, a pink tea party, because that's how women secured the vote in Canada and the right to be an elected official, is they brought their friends together and they discussed how do we make life better for us and for others. So using your teacup, I think in the notice you were asked to bring your teacup or a glass or a mug. I'd like to start by proposing a toast to Nancy Ruth. So Nancy, your mug can go down for now because we're going to toast you, the unconventional Nancy Ruth. Your book is really amazing and it talks, as Ramona had said, about your difficult childhood. I'm grateful for you disclosing you had self-doubt despite everything else that was of abundance in your life. You also led us into some of your failures. But by doing so, Nancy, you gave us a wonderful insight, a wonderful path to follow, to see how one comes to grips with obstacles and then tackles them and then overcomes them. So there is no doubt in our minds that, as Amanda said in her introduction, that the Honorable Nancy Ruth has improved the lives of girls and women 10,000 times, 10,000 times. And because of the institutional and legislative changes you have ensured are enacted, that will continue, Nancy Ruth. Such an awesome contribution to Canada. And so, to the unconventional Nancy Ruth, our thanks.
Hear, hear.
Thank you.
And today we've had the pleasure of meeting another leader, someone who is very well regarded in academic circles for her academic excellence, but also for her academic leadership in a number of organizations across Canada. And as Nancy has said, also on a number of community boards as well. The Unconventional Nancy Ruth, the book, is really beautifully written, Ramona. And I don't know how you were able to piece everything together to give us these insights and evaluations of what Nancy has been able to do. And I would just remind viewers that as part of our email links to you and our previous emails to you, we have told you that Second Story Press, who has published the book, is willing to give you a discount. So if you go to Second Story Press, or once you find the promo code in our notice that's going to come to you just shortly, please order Nancy's book, and it's available either in hard copy or on as an ebook. And I'm sorry, I don't have my hard copy with me, but it's a wonderful read, and it's a read like Cindy's books that are particularly good for the girls in your life too. So to Dr. Ramona Lumpkin, who has helped in so many days, our thanks to you too, to Ramona.
Ramona.
Thank you.
Now, our other role models today are Amanda, Samantha, and Jazz. We're in such good hands with these three young leaders. So a toast, please, to Amanda, to Jazz, and to Sam. Thank you. And now I'm going to ask our talented AV crew to let our program participants relax for a moment as I bring you some Famous Five news. And the first item is to encourage you to visit the Famous Five Foundation website, famous5.ca. And at the top, you'll see a list of menu items, resources. And under that, you will find the March 5th virtual pink tea with the magnificent Cindy Blackstock. Cindy is the CEO of the First Nations Caring Society. And during her pink tea, she gave us a spectacular overview of the challenges and opportunities of being an Indigenous person in Canada. So that's the March 5th virtual pink tea for you to go and to review at your leisure again and again. As well as all the other things Cindy did, she's written 2 books for children. And this is the first one, Spirit Bear, Honoring Memories and Planting Dreams. And the second book is called Spirit Bear, Knowledge Catching Dreams, Fishing for Knowledge Catching Dreams. Now, these 2 books Cindy wrote for children, but I strongly recommend that we adults read them, and we read them to our children and our grandchildren, and perhaps to our parents, and to newcomers, and to others, because Cindy provides, again, an overview of what it is like to be an Indigenous person in Canada, and she does that realistically, she does that sadly, but she also does that lovingly and optimistically. They're wonderful, wonderful reads. But if you'd rather take action to do something while you're feeling particularly upset about what has been disclosed in Kamloops, by all means, write to your elected officials, your MPs, your MPs, your MLAs, the municipal officials, but also to your senators, and urge them through their institutions to support our Indigenous brothers and sisters. But then there's things we can do, because it's not all up to the government, it's up to us. So we can attend vigils, and while we're at the vigil, we should talk to our Indigenous brothers and sisters. And I invite them to come and talk to us too. If you have a flag, lower it, or put another indication of support for our Indigenous sisters and brothers. And then get together and start developing some solutions. All the solutions aren't to come from government. All the solutions aren't to come from 1 or 2 groups. It's coming from all of us. And this call for action for a better way to enhance the lives for all of Canada is really necessary. It's our time to step up. And my particular thanks for this call to action from Leslie Two Feathers, who amongst a number of other people wrote and said, please encourage people to be more actively responding to what they are hearing, not to ignore it. Next month, on July the 9th, we're going to talk about female entrepreneurs and venture capitalists. As all of you know or suspect, female entrepreneurs do not receive the same amount of access nor final dollars for their ideas, for their companies. 3 remarkable tech success stories led by 3 women, Alice Reimer, Shelley Kuipers, and Judy Fairburn, have established a venture capital company called the 51. I'm so used to saying the famous 5. Their company is called the 51, which of course mirrors the percentage of women, although it is higher, in our population. And so it will be fascinating to hear the stories from Judy and from Shelley as to their experiences as tech entrepreneurs, but also now as venture capitalists. So particularly if you know a woman who is an entrepreneur, ask her, invite her, make it possible for her to attend, because it might turn out to be just exactly the piece of information or the connection she needs to take her company to the next level. And on August 13th, we'll be meeting Vivian Poi. Vivian is a fashion designer and retailer. She's a PhD historian. She is a former senator, and as a former senator, I am so grateful that she agreed to our request to start championing the restoration of the national anthem. And she moved it up a whole level. And then when she had to retire from the Senate of Canada, she asked Nancy Ruth to take over. And boy, Nancy Ruth moved it up a whole nother level too. She had websites and songs and buttons and pens, and fantastic. Nancy just all stops out for restoring our anthem to its natural or its original inclusivity. So that'll be Vivian Poi. And in September, we will be joined by Chantal Petitclerc, probably the most decorated female Paralympian in Canada and maybe in the world. She now is a senator. So we will be most interested to hear some of the issues around the Paralympics or the Olympics and how she is finding being a senator and following in Nancy Ruth's footsteps. So our thanks to all of you who bought seasons passes, and just a word of encouragement to say seasons passes are now available for the balance of the 2021 session. So as you know, we have one last toast, because all of us are perceived as leaders too. Some of us don't think of ourselves that way, but we are. And so to say thank you to us and to encourage us to be braver leaders, we will toast to us too. So in a strong, clear voice, please say, to me, I'm a leader too.
To me,
I'm a leader too.
Thank you. So this concludes the intellectual part of our virtual pink tea. Again, my thanks to Carolyn Harley for her beautiful Ballad of the Famous 5, which always makes me cry, but that's a whole nother story. And now we're going to hear from a talented singer-songwriter from Saskatoon who has written a high school musical about the Famous 5. Her name is Brianna Burke, and she's singing her song, The Famous 5. So again, thank you all. Miigwech, merci for attending today. Special thanks to Nancy and to Ramona and the other program participants. And we'll see you in July, and we can report on what we have done in the intervening month. So thank you very much. Bonsoir.
Years ago, women were treated very differently than they are today. No provinces in Canada granted women the right to vote yet, and women could not be appointed to the Senate. 5 Canadian women by the names of Emily Murphy, Irene Parlby, Henrietta Weir Edwards, Louise McKinney, and Nellie McClung put forward a petition called The Persons Case. They challenged the government, stating that women are considered persons too and should be able to sit in the Senate. In 1929, it was declared that women are legally considered persons. These women would be forever known as the Famous 5, the Valiant 5. Welcome to the 20th century. Women in Canadian history. We all had a role to play so that women could be heard today. We're the famous five, the valiant five, the famous five, the valiant five, changing the lives of the sisters, mothers, wives. The famous five, here is why. It's me, I'm Nellie McClung. 1916, fought for women and won. Yes, we could vote, but I wasn't done. The famous five, we made a petition. Are we person? Could you please clarify? Are we person? Even if I'm not a guy. 1929, we say you can sit in the Senate if you are a lady. My turn, I'm Emily Murphy. I'm educated and I moved to the prairie. 1916, my political victory. First woman judge, now can we win the battle of the person's case? Oh, it's the person's case. 1929, we say you can sit in the Senate if you are a lady. Oh. Henry, Adam, Weir, Edwards, they call me. Women's laws and rights are my expertise. Many years we fought to be a person legally. We're the famous five, the valiant five, the famous five, the valiant five, changing the lives of the sisters, mothers, wives.